there's a simplicity that happens on the other side of complexity. You've got to wade through the complexity and sit with it and ruminate and reflect and meditate on the complete. You can't shortcut that.
Hey there, and welcome back into the Direct Selling Accelerator Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Hind, and today I am honored and privileged to be bringing back again a very special guest to this podcast, Michael McQueen. Michael McQueen has spent the past 2 decades helping organizations and leaders win the battle for relevance and to stay one step ahead of change. He's the best-selling author of 9 books and internationally sought-after award-winning keynote speaker who's shared the stage with the likes of Bill Gates and Dr. John C. Maxwell, just to name a few. Today, I am privileged to have him joining me to discuss the art of changing minds in a world where open-mindedness has become almost untrendy. I am so excited to share this interview with you. I had a great time chatting with him about his newest book, his 10th release. Today we got chatting about Mindstuck and essentially how to change the minds of those people around you in a way that is feel good, but also gets a result. So in a world where social media and digital trends have taken on the world and a life like no other, especially in the direct selling industry, I think this is a very relevant conversation. So I hope you enjoy this interview as much as I enjoyed it. Grab yourself a cup of tea or coffee, sit back, relax, and enjoy. Welcome back on into the Direct Selling Accelerator Podcast. You all know me, but this amazing gentleman beside me here, Michael McQueen, of course, is our guest today, and I'm so excited to have you back in here, Michael. Thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure. Great to be able to spend some time chatting again.
Look, I'm excited about this conversation because what a not only relevant topic to talk about, but also I think quite an overwhelming topic to talk about in so many ways. We're going to be chatting, of course, about influence and changing minds, and this has all come from your incredible new book. And the last time you were on the podcast, you hinted that you would be releasing a 10th
Yes.
book. So congratulations on the release of your 10th book. That's an amazing accomplishment.
Thank you so much. Yeah, this one's been a lot of work, hey? So I feel like it's probably been 9 years all up, but the real concentrated writing time was the last 3.5 years. So
Yep.
yeah, I think when we last spoke, I was probably just in the final stages of writing drafts, and it's just anyone who's done that process, like at the last stage, you're just swimming in words and ideas, and you have to then stop and then step back from it and get perspective. So that's probably where I was up to last time.
Yeah, you were being a little cagey about giving us any information at that stage.
There you go. It's mainly because I didn't know the answer to the question. Like, what's your book about? I'm like, well, it's sort of this and it's sort of that. I don't know yet, basically. So yeah, it's nice to be on the other side of that now.
I'm going to be really honest. I'm in that stage right now where all the ideas are getting thrown down, and I'm thinking, I have to choose a lane, because when you've got all of these thoughts in your head, and I'm guessing that's where sort of that process was at for you at that stage, where it's got to choose a lane, got to have some clarity here around what the exact message is that you're wanting to share in this book.
Correct. And I feel like that's the reality, is that if you can't describe something to an 8-year-old, or in a way that an 8-year-old understands, you don't know it yourself yet.
Yeah.
And when you and I think probably for people dialing in, you get to that point from a business perspective where like you know all the stuff, like you know about the products and the comp plan and all the rest, but it's still too complicated in your head.
Yeah.
And until you can break something down so it's relevant to and digestible for an 8-year-old, you really don't understand it. And I certainly knew last time that's where I was at. And I think for a lot of people, there's a simplicity that happens on the other side of complexity. You've got to wade through the complexity and sit with it and ruminate and reflect and meditate on the complexity. You can't shortcut that.
Yeah.
But then at the other side, there's simplicity. You know, when you hear someone say something, you go, gosh, that is so profound. And you're like, that's only profound because it's the condensed version of a whole lot of thought and reflection and wisdom. You never get to simplicity easily. That's certainly been my experience with this project.
Well, that's all very true. And on this, we're going to talk about you've simplified a very complex topic. As you, in this book, you talk, of course, about the art of influence, essentially, or changing people's minds. And I can't wait to unpack this, because how insanely relevant is this? On social media, but in general right now, it really in every, I'm going to take this a step further. I believe in not just every aspect of business, but I'm fascinated as a mum and a wife around the art of influence, because this impacts all of the people around you as well, right?
Well, it does. And it's not just about influencing, but realizing why it's so hard to do so.
Yeah.
And why is it that it seems like, and whether, again, if it's in a relationship or in our families with kids or at work, in our businesses, why does everyone else seem so stubborn from time to time without realizing that we also get stubborn and fixed in our thinking?
Yeah.
And, we'd all like to think that we are really reasonable and really open-minded. And we have that sort of blind spot, I think all of us naturally do. And if there's stubbornness involved, it's everyone else who's unwilling to see reason or change their thinking. And so it's even owning that ourselves and realizing we're so prone to being obstinate and stubborn, and how that can shape our thinking. And the posture it creates is one where you're not able to learn.
Yeah.
You're not able to see things differently. And that's how we grow as humans. That's how we keep our businesses relevant, if we're willing to grow. But I think for a lot of us, you get to a point where you've learned a lot and you think, I just want to set in stone what I know because it's safe now. It's just too overwhelming to keep learning and changing and updating my assumptions. And yet the moment you do that, it's like, the old saying, the moment you think you've made it, you've passed it. And I think a lot of us feel like we've made it in terms of our worldview and our assumptions and our beliefs, but actually that's the danger zone where you're no longer in a posture of curiosity or humility, and you can't grow anymore.
Yeah.
So that's sort of the dual focus of the book, is how do you change other people's minds, but also how do you make sure that you stay in a posture where you're able to change your own mind too?
Yeah. That's so true. I'm definitely a very open-minded person, Michael. I'm not stuck in my ways, but we'll talk to everyone else out there, shall we? I have to be careful a little bit. I've realized in the travel, speaking around the globe, as you would come across this, because you're an incredibly successful keynote speaker on so many topics, and this being just one of them. You would come across this difference in culture as well, where sometimes our very Australian sense of humour can be seen as quite serious rather than sarcasm or simply our dry sense of humour. And so there have been times where I have, cracked a little joke like that, and people take it seriously. So, I agree with you. I think we all need to be a little bit more open-minded, and learning is such an important part of growth. But I want to know, because I've got my copy here and I've got my Post-its and my notes, but I want to know, what was the inspiration behind writing this book in particular? I feel like there's a story there, and I know it took you a little while to kind of get it simplified, like you said, but what was the inspiration and I guess the reason specifically for writing around this particular topic and unsticking some minds?
And it's a good question, because the reality is I've spent 20 years writing and researching around the future and demographic change and technology trends and disruption in business and strategy stuff. So it does seem like a bit of a gear shift for me to write a book about persuasion and the psychology of stubbornness. Where's that come from? And so the genesis story for this one was a particular conversation. So it was actually late 2015. I was speaking at a conference in Sydney on the Hilton Hotel in the big ballroom there. And it was an industry association event. I'd been asked to give the keynote presentation just before the lunch break, all around the disruptions and the changes, the influence of AI that were going to shape the industry. So I'd done that. And after the keynote, I was just standing at the back and chatting with a few people. And there was this one woman who walked up. Her name was Helen from the Hilton. And so Helen wandered up, and I could just see by her whole demeanor, she was frustrated and exasperated. You can just see that in people. She's just tired.
Here it comes.
She said, I am so with you. I get this. I know what's coming. She said, the frustrating thing for me is, if I think about my organization and said, I'm the only one from my team who's here, my biggest challenge is, how do I get my bosses my leadership team across the line to realize we've got to change. Like,
Yeah.
if they're so fixed in their thinking about the way we should do business, the way the industry works, what customers want, it's all outdated information. Like, it's not true anymore. And I've tried to persuade them that we need to go with the times and change, and they just can't see it. And she said, "What have you got any suggestions?" And so I started off by asking her, like, "Well, what have you tried already?" So she sort of said the approaches she'd done. She'd done the cost benefit analysis of changing the burning platform approach. If we don't change this is going to happen. It just hadn't gotten through. And I realized what she'd actually done was all the things the books tell you should do if you're going to persuade a stubborn person, and that hadn't worked. And once I was aware of this, I started to see how often this dynamic came up in conversations I was having with clients.
Yeah.
And the reality is her experience is not unique. So the headline stat that stunned me when I began to look at this is that we spend 40% of our professional time trying to change other people's thinking or behavior or their habits. And that happens at home, but also happens at work, obviously. And the confronting reality is that there was a study done at Cornell University a few years ago that found this. We're only actually successful in changing someone else's mind between 3 and 5% of the time. So we're just not good at it.
Wow.
And the reality is that's a bit of a global phenomenon. So I wanted to look at why.
Yeah.
Like, what is it about what we've been taught about changing people's minds that just doesn't work or isn't as effective now as it may have been in decades past? And then what does work?
Yeah.
If you want to bring someone along the change journey. So that was the genesis moment and what kicked off the whole process.
And that's really perfect because you segued into my next question just seamlessly without knowing what I was going to ask, which is, why, and you talk about in the book the fact that the techniques of influence that we have been taught, that we grew up with, that we know, just as you've said, are flawed. And, for some people that'll be like an, "Oh, are you kidding me?" moment because, does that mean I've wasted everything I've learned and the experience and expertise that I have? I, being someone who is trained in old school sales and marketing and the art of, utilizing psychology, of course, to sell to somebody, which is what we were taught all of those years ago.
Yeah.
I'm curious about the answer to this.
Yeah.
And I'm sure our listeners will be too. Why are these techniques flawed? And in the case of Helen from Hilton, why were those things that she had done simply not working?
Yeah. So probably the most significant one is that many of us have an unconscious assumption that if someone doesn't see reason or they're really obstinate or just doesn't see our perspective, the reason is because they're missing some information. There's a knowledge gap. And so if we could just get them to read another book, to listen to a different perspective or our arguments, our best watertight logical arguments, or get better data to them, if they could just get the right information to close that knowledge gap, they'd see the light. They go, "Oh, gosh, you know what? I was wrong and you are right and I've seen it now."
Yeah.
And we'd like to think that's
the
true.
words
And that
every woman wants to hear from her husband.
That's of course, yes. And the truth is, we've thought this for centuries. So, I mean, one of the foundational thinkers, I guess, started this off as a philosophy, a very formalized way of thinking about education and persuasion. Was a guy who, back in the early days of the Enlightenment, a guy named Francis Bacon, who's the man he coined the phrase "knowledge is power." So Francis Bacon, some people may have heard that name. So he was one of the founding fathers of the Enlightenment. His big idea is that humans are fundamentally reasonable. And if you just give people the right information and enough information, the right data, they'll arrive at a reasonable point of view. They'll see the light, they'll see reason, they'll change their mind. What we've discovered is that not only is that not true, in the last 15 years, we've realized the degree to which the opposite is actually true. And when you've got someone who's got a very fixed and rigid idea about the way the world should be, the way that they are, the way their business should run, the way their industry operates, the more stubborn and fixed they are, the more evidence you give them, the more they dig their heels in, the more stubborn they become. The harder you press, the more they fold their arms. And so like this notion of, in psychology, they talk about this as reactance, this idea, the harder you push, the more they push back. And yet we've essentially the last 400 years of academia, of government messaging and policy, most marketing and sales has been around this sort of idea that if you just give people better information, they'll arrive at a better conclusion. And it's just not true. And so that's confronting because we still use so many of those tools, particularly, in the direct selling world, we want to give people all the science.
Yes,
All the
the
studies that show how
statistics, the information.
effective the products are. Correct. All that stuff, thinking that, if we just show them another good pie chart about how, what their earning capacity is and why the comp plan's better
Yeah.
than all the others in the industry and all those things, and yet it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
And often, again, the more you pile those things on, the more stubborn people can become.
Interesting thought. I want to challenge that with something which I mentioned to you earlier. The theory there would be that a child or a teenager, therefore, who has relatively little knowledge because their world experience is just at the very beginning, it would, I guess, suggest that they would be much easier to influence, and yet I notice that they're often the ones right now most stuck in their ways.
Yep.
Would that be your observation as well?
Yes. So there's a couple of things playing into that which are interesting. Hey, so the first one is, apart from what their knowledge is, if you want to think about a person having a hard drive that fills up as you get older, the more you learn, the more you see, the more you experience, your hard drive gets full because you're getting experiences and data points that form your worldview. So there's an extent to which a younger child has a less full hard drive. So you think they might be more impressionable.
Yes.
But the other thing is, it's not just about the hard drive. It's also about what makes people open to accepting new information that maybe is uncomfortable or confronting. And the big thing that we've got to be mindful of when persuading young people is not that they necessarily have preconceived ideas that can stop them from wanting to change or grow or learn. It's that they want to have control. They want to have agency. The moment you feel you've taken agency away and you're telling them how they should do things, even if deep down they're like, you know what, you're probably right, Mum, or you're probably right, Dad. Like deep down, if they feel like they haven't had a choice, they will butt their head. There'll be headbutting that goes on instantly. I mean, it's like any young child. And we had our little boy the other day came back from school camp, eyes falling out of his head, hadn't slept much in 2 or 3 days. And I made the mistake that every parent makes, go, gosh, she looks so tired. We need to have early night tonight. And he's at the table, eyes falling, like mid-yawn. He says, I'm not tired. And I think every kid says it. And it's just this, it's something about human nature. If we're told something, we don't want to accept it. And so there is that sense of needing agency. So there's all sorts of reasons people do push back. The thing that's interesting about particularly teenagers when it comes to being stubborn or rigid is there is a stage of development, and it's actually a really important stage in the sort of mid-teens era where you develop binary ideas, right and wrong, black and white. And there's safety in that. There's security, tribalism comes into play. My people think this, people who are not like me think that. That's actually an important part of growing up. You then grow out of that as you become more aware that there's lots of complexity and nuance in the world, and your horizons broaden. The thing that we're noticing right now, and you've probably seen this too, is that social media is warping this. Because if you're a 15 or 16-year-old who's in that like black and white stage of life, just because that's part of your development, and you're on Instagram or you're on Facebook, what does the algorithm show you more of? Everything you already believe to be true, everything you already agree with, everything people from your tribe are saying
that's such a true
is a true view of the world. And now the tricky thing is you fast forward 2 and 3 years and that algorithm is still feeding you a steady diet of the things that you already agree with. You've become more galvanized in those views. And rather than exiting that stage of life where it's black and white, right and wrong, and you actually know what there's complexity, in those formative years, you're now a 17-year-old who's had a steady diet of things that you agree with and vehemently agree with. It's tribalism kicks in. And this is why we're seeing young people often getting radicalized online around all sorts of things. And it can be as simple as conspiracy belief or some of this really toxic masculinity messaging that comes out because the algorithms kick off. And, of course, that just feeds into one of the things that our brains do really well, which is look for things that confirm what we've already decided is true. And so we all do that, but it happens more with teenagers.
Yeah, it's such a, wow, what an eye-opening thought, but it's so true that because of course that algorithm is delivering us the content that we want to see based on our activities, based on what it knows about us, and in fact knows more about us in many cases than we know about ourselves. It's really interesting what it can predict about behavior, but it makes me wonder what future that's going to form, given that our teens right now, and then of course the young ones that are going to continue coming up, are not developing those
Yeah.
thought processes in the natural way. Or it shouldn't say natural way, because it's all been everything's been influenced. It's just that the form of influence has changed so dramatically and is so tailored to the person now.
Yep.
It kind of then brings in my second thought here, and I want to just get some clarity around this, because I think there's a very fine line here. You also talk a lot about the difference between persuasion and coercion. Can you clarify the difference between the two and where that line is? Because I'm not so sure I've got clarity.
Tricky, hey? It is hard because a lot of it is in the part of the person who's doing the persuading. It's about your motivation. What's your intent here? So you obviously, when you go into any conversation where you're hoping to have some degree of influence, you firstly want to check, is it a positive influence?
Yep.
I mean, there are very few people who go, I want to harm the other person. But truly, do you want to benefit more from the situation? So, and I think we've got to be careful. That's when manipulation or coercion starts to kick in, when you're going, I've got an agenda, and my agenda is I will benefit from this change. If they benefit, that's nice. It's a byproduct, as opposed to I'm going to go in seeking their gain and seeking their dignity, affirming that they do have a choice, and actually I want them to choose something that's going to benefit them as well. So I think we've got to be very mindful of our motivation. That's a big part of this. I find one of the most valuable tools, and I use this often because one of the organizations I've been a brand ambassador for as a charity for years is Rotary International. So Rotary do brilliant stuff around eradicating polio and a lot of development. We're developing world aid and lots of community action stuff. But right from their inception, Rotary have had this thing they call the 4-way test. And it's sort of one of their core values as an organization. And it's something they encourage their members to approach their own businesses with. And it's about acting with integrity.
Yep.
So the 4-way test is before you do anything, engage in any business transaction, whatever you do, ask, is it true? Is it fair? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? And will it be beneficial to all concerned? And I like those 4 questions. And I feel like if you approach influence with the same thing, then you're generally not going to put a foot wrong. And I think the key one there is beneficial, because true is tricky. I mean, because everyone's version of truth is up to them. Fair can get a bit rubbery, but beneficial will both parties, you and the person you're trying to persuade or convince or encourage to see things differently. Will they benefit as well? And it's the main thing you've got to just check is your own heart and your own approach to this. And that's really the most important thing when it comes to persuading, is that your attitude and your intent is good.
Yeah. You know, that does then, of course, bring to the forefront the question many people will ask about themselves, which is it okay for me to influence or change the minds of people when it comes to selling my product or, having them join my business? Because I know that for many that point in which they feel uncomfortable is, I shouldn't be selling. I don't feel like it's the right thing to do. It feels like manipulation. And I just, that's where I think sometimes there can be that really fine line. I'd love to get your thoughts on that, because to me, when we sell and when we're marketing our products and our service and our business opportunities, we are doing a service. But the question is, how do people get, what's the word I'm looking for? Peace, I suppose, around persuading people to buy from them.
Yeah. I think, the key thing is, do you really know that, do you have a sense that they will benefit from this more than they pay? Because that's where value lives.
Yeah.
And the tricky thing in the direct selling industry, and I see this across so many of the companies that I work with when I speak at their conferences, is one of the hallmarks of the industry is incentives. So we've got a trip to such and such in October of such and such a year. And if you qualify with this level, what that can do, even though it's great because it creates a goal and creates that sense of urgency, it can create that almost scarcity. That can sometimes become manipulation, because it's like, I'm talking to this person because I've got my goal.
Because I need to get here.
I want to get to the event. I want the event or the trip or whatever it is, or win the car.
And so the question of will this benefit the other person kind of goes out the window, because they just want to tick the box and get the number.
Yeah. So always take a long-term view. Like ultimately the relationship matters most.
Yep.
And so you might not get the sale. You might not even get on the trip this time. The trip will happen next year. The car will happen next year. But if you've burned relationships in the process, when you get to the incentive trip, some of that joy will be emptied of it, because you'll know that you got there by perhaps pushing too hard or doing things that just don't vibe with your own values. So I think that's my encouragement, is while incentives can be great things for encouraging us to, step out, be really intentional, set a goal that makes us stretch, at the same time, it can just dull our sense of, are we really approaching this with good intentions and with a desire to benefit the other person?
Yeah, it's an interesting thought. There's so much to that. One of the things that, and that sort of brings to my mind, one of the things we talk a lot about, which is the importance of being convinced yourself first. So when you are selling your product or your business or your service or your opportunity or whatever it happens to be, if you're going into that wondering whether or not you should be selling, or whether you feel an incongruency there, the person you should be convincing first is you. And so we actually get people often to do an activity where they have to sit down and write out up to 200 reasons why what they're selling or what they're doing is of benefit to themselves, their family, globally, community. And it's not that hard in the end to actually come up with those reasons. But the one thing that it does every time is convince the person writing the list that what they're selling is actually of benefit to the other person. It changes the way that they approach the sale, and of course the level of influence that they have as a result.
And what I would say to that as well is there's two things there. So there's obviously congruence, like you want to make sure what you're selling or promoting or encouraging others to consider is congruent with your values. The other side of this is confidence. And you often see people go, until I'm really sold on it, because I still don't know enough. I don't know enough details about the products and the science behind it and the pricing plan and the comp plan. I'm like, I don't even know what all the different levels in the business. I keep getting them mixed up in my head. What I would say, as long as there's not a congruence issue, as in like I just don't have a piece in my gut about this yet. If it's a confidence thing, don't let that stop you, because actually, often in that stage where you're still not quite sure and you're figuring it all out, you'll be the most persuasive that you'll ever be. Because there's something about being scrappy and giving something a go that, in fact, one of my encouragements to clients when they're trying to apply some of the concepts in this book, particularly clients who are very experienced, is you need to unsell rather than upsell your ideas or your products or your service or your business. Because the challenge is once you get to the point where it's all too watertight and it's all too like polished answers and canned responses and this argument. And if they
this
say
is
this,
what
I'll
I'm
say
supposed to say versus this is what I actually feel
Correct.
about this.
People pick up on it, don't they? So I think there's that rawness is actually a great thing. In fact, one of the encouragements I give to people when they're having difficult conversations is firstly call out the awkward. Like just say, I've been stewing over this for the last day or two. I didn't want to call you, but I thought I've just put my big boy pants on. I'm just going to pick up the phone. And if you say that, it's amazing. The other person can go, "Oh gosh, I'm so sorry. Like, what's happened?" Like, they want to help. They lean forward.
Yeah, just get it out. Let me hear it. Yeah, I love that.
Truly, like self-deprecation, not taking yourself too seriously, asking for help.
Yes.
Acknowledging that you don't have all the answers. Even just some of the things you can preface statements or ideas with, like, hey, look, I might be way off here.
Yeah.
Or like just my sense is that, but I'm not 100% sure. Or like I've got this idea, but I'd be keen to get your input on. Like just this idea of not going in all guns blazing with the most polished argument, just going and going, this is just an idea. I'm keen to get your input. And you invite them into the conversation rather than it being a sales pitch. Because the moment it's a sales pitch, what do we all do? It's like you walk through the mall and someone comes up and they're from a charity, and it might even be a charity you love and you'd like to donate to, but they come up and go, have you got a minute? What do you say? No, I don't. I'm busy.
Yeah.
You may not even be busy, but like that's the automatic response because there's a sales pitch involved. So even just the posture we approach these things with makes a difference. And that's why if it's a lack of confidence, don't let that stop you, because that scrappiness can actually be very endearing, very persuasive, because it's real, it's authentic.
Yeah. It's interesting. I've got two thoughts that just come to mind there, and some amazing people in the industry that I've connected with over the years. And there was actually someone I interviewed on this podcast about a year ago who is a top leader with a direct selling company, and she came in and talked about we were talking about being real and relatable, and she spoke about showing up on social media in a way that is, that sort of that unfiltered, not unprofessional, but just the unfiltered real life version of themselves. And one of the things that she said she did was this particular company brought out these new eyelashes, and she'd never in her life put eyelashes on. She'd never played with these things before, and she thought, I've got two options here. I can perfect this and get really good at it and show up and do it in the perfect way, the way it's supposed to be done.
Yeah.
Or I can
Yeah.
show up and actually say to people, hey, this is a new product. I've never used anything like this before. I'm totally a newbie to this. So, hey, let's just try and put these on and see how it goes. And she
Yep.
did. And she had glue all down her face. She had eyelashes everywhere. And she said that
Yeah.
the craziest thing happened. She said that, the theory would be if I show up in that way, I wouldn't make any sales because I don't really understand the product yet. But the truth of the matter was that people actually really therefore trusted what she was saying because they could see how honest she was being. She said that whilst she sold lots of that product, what she actually sold more of were other products that people were afraid to talk to her about previously because they knew now if I ask her which eye cream I should be using, she's going to give me the truthful answer because of how honest she was just being with that video.
Yeah. Yep. It's amazing how, and that's what the research bears out. And it's incredible how effective that is. So in fact, one of the studies that I came across in the book when I was putting it together was looking at how this plays out in a legal context, which is interesting. What they found is there was a study of what were the points where a jury began to favor one side's argument versus the other.
Yeah.
And the moment typically where this occurred is where one side, the solicitor, brought to the jury presented information that may work against their own case. They acknowledged that there was areas of grey. It wasn't just black and white.
Yeah.
In fact, their perspective wasn't the only perspective, and they just acknowledged that up front. But the key was you had to acknowledge those things before the opposition had a chance to point them out.
That's
and what that did
so
is
good.
it instantly set the jury's minds at ease because just like the example of someone, if I've seen you put on eyelashes and you stuff that up and you've been honest about it, when I ask you something else, I can trust you because there is that sense of you're just real.
Yeah.
And so what they did is it communicated, again, as long as it's not a tool of manipulation and isn't honest, like it isn't truthful, if you're just open enough to be able to be self-deprecating, self-disclosure is a same related concept. It engenders trust, and it means that people essentially it disarms the other party because they're no longer sitting there going looking for the loopholes. What are you not telling me here? Like you've been
thinking
upfront.
that you've got it perfect, and it actually brings another thought to mind because what I want to talk to you about, of course, is some of your strategies around influence in this space, and of course we're not going to be able to go into a lot of it today. That's what the book's for, but actually I'm left turn here for a second. When I started reading this book, I was thinking to myself, who was this written for specifically? Because I'm thinking, initially I pick it up and I go, this is great for business and learning to sell and persuading people, in a business sense. So whether it's your boss to give you a raise or whether it's, a colleague to change their mind or whether it is a customer, or a business opportunity. But then as I started to sort of get into it, I thought, actually, as a mum and as a partner and as a friend, and you start to see all of these different ways that you can apply this these strategies. And I just was curious to know from you who you wrote this for.
I think so. Probably the best way I'd answer that question is my goal, and this is a fairly lofty goal for the book, was to write the how to influence and influence people of the 21st century.
Oh, I like
that was
it.
my goal. I just wanted to write a book that was really accessible, really useful, very practical, but really grounded in good science and good research.
Yes.
And I think one of the things that's interesting about, if you look at Dale Carnegie's book, a lot of this book picks up on some of the reasons a few of those principles work so well. And at the time, we didn't know why they worked. I mean, Dale Carnegie didn't know that we'd never done a functional MRI scan at that point to look at how the brain responds to different stimulus and situations and contexts and language. So what this book in many ways does is it sort of closes that loop and looks at why some of those principles work and then what we've learned since then as well. And so that was the goal, is to write something that was useful if you're managing a team or if you're a parent with a teenager that's tricky or a school teacher who's got a class where you feel like they're resistant to what you're trying to teach them. So like it is across the board, all the different just environments we find ourselves in. It really was designed to be a book that would be useful and accessible across that spectrum, which does make it difficult because sometimes if you've got a really narrow scope of who your target market is, it's very easy to write a book for that because you can just give in case studies and data that's very specific in that one industry. It is much broader than that, which made it difficult to write in a way, very difficult to edit, because trying to narrow the scope when you've got a broad audience is difficult. But that was the goal, and I hope I've gotten somewhere close to achieving the goal.
I think so. I think anyone reading it will be able to see how they can apply it across the board for sure. But it does make me wonder. So, there's a scenario that I'm faced with right now, and I briefly mentioned this to you before, but I haven't heard your answer in this space. And, as a mum, probably one of the hardest things for me to do ever is to persuade and influence my own children, because of course different generations and different motivations behind the reason for the influence. And I was having a conversation with my 15-year-old recently. He's just started his first job, and with that, of course, up until now, the money that he's received has been from us, and so we've worked very hard to coach him, I suppose, in, the best ways to manage his money. And we take a very barefoot investor-like approach with our finances. So it comes in and then you separate it, and you make sure that you're allocating and you're saving and you've got your spend. So you've got that short-term fix, etc. But the problem we've got is that suddenly he's got money he earned outside of our family, and it is burning a big fat hole in his pocket right now. So every day he's got a new thing he wants to buy. And the interesting thing, of course, here, Michael, is the things he wants to buy are things that he has seen through influencers on social media. I am absolutely blown away that Crocs have made a comeback at $70 a pop.
Oh my, it's wild, isn't it?
So of course he wants to spend all his money, and it's doing my head in trying to convince him that he needs to put some of this money aside. So I thought to myself, what if I dangle a carrot and I suggest maybe I could take him overseas later on in the year on a missions trip to Fiji to go and visit some students over there. We want to go to a school, and I threw this at him because I knew he'd jump at it, and he was really excited. But the very next day, just before we start saving for that, I've got something else I want to spend all my money on. And I thought, how on earth do you influence, Michael, a teenager who doesn't want to hear from their parents about how to spend their money, as an example? And I'm sure that this will translate.
It does translate. And I think probably the key thing here would be he's in a bit of a honeymoon stage with his finances. And so there's if you cast your mind back to that stage, I remember my first job, like that first few months, I think it's a very natural thing. You don't want to push too early because, he's in this honeymoon stage where he's suddenly got a level of freedom he's never had before. And that is fun. That's exciting. That is expansive. That is expensive, but also expansive. And to an extent, that's actually a necessary process for him to go through. What I would say is that, I even affirm and say, I love the freedom and the excitement you've got around your money. I remember that stage really well. Let's enjoy it. What I would say is in like 6 months' time, let's just circle back and then have a chat about what some of the smart things you can do. Because in 6 months' time, he'll blow off some steam. He'll get used to that. But then it's a case of now let's put some rigor in place. And I think if you push too early, because it's almost like ruining the fun. You know what I mean? Like there's a stage where that's actually quite natural and normal. But if probably the key caveat is if debt becomes involved, different story.
Yeah.
If suddenly he's going into debt because that's a shackle that'll impact his future. At the moment, it's money in, money out. And that's actually, I feel like to an extent, allowing that, giving freedom for that. In fact, what you might find is giving the full freedom, like, you know what, I get it, knock yourself out. I did the same thing. I think there's a stage of life where it's okay. You may even find, it's almost like reverse psychology, he suddenly has less of a desire to do it. Like just by
What's
giving
wrong
him the
with
freedom.
my mum? Hang on.
Like truly, like, and just to say, like, I get it, I think it's important, but not forever. Like, it's just you're a smart kid, and so this is when you want to call out the virtue and the skill you see in the person, because it's amazing how they'll live up to it. Like, I know that a lot of your mates just blow their money and are idiots, and that's just such a common thing to do, and it's so hard to not fall into that trap. You are smarter than that, and I know that. For now, enjoy this, but let's have a chat in like 6 months, and let's look at, like, because you are a smart kid. What do smart people who are 17 and 18 do that they're grateful for in 5 years' time? But like, not for now. This is not a conversation for now. Let's circle back in like September. Like, time dependent, as long as debt's not involved, just giving him the freedom and the agency. And you may even find just giving him that sense of freedom is the very thing he needs to actually go, oh, maybe I don't need to spend so much and buy the $70 Crocs, for instance. So I think that would be my encouragement with just this specific thing. But I think calling out what you see in him, affirming that is important.
Yeah.
And then maybe setting a time-dependent thing. And then once it's time, let's say this conversation's in 6 months' time and he's had the blow off some steam, buy a whole lot of rubbish he's only going to use for 3 months, then it's a case of, okay, so what's firstly the goal, but also measure progress.
Yep.
I mean, the reality is people tend to lose heart and not stick at things even that they want to if they don't feel like they're getting anywhere. So I think measuring progress is probably the key thing, and that's for any habit you want to set for someone. If there's a sense of forward momentum and progress, that's when those habits stick. So giving him something that allows him to see progress and movement is probably the key then at that point of persuading him that this is worthwhile sticking with.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I'm really grateful. I've got some parenting advice here as well as, of course, a podcast interview. So I'm winning. But I'm curious to know, because of course, we want to talk about, influencing and persuading from a business sense as well. What are some of the tips or strategies that you could give, maybe just sort of your top 3 highlights, I suppose, of strategies that people can implement that do work right now. And again, I know all of this is covered in your book, and you give, 15 skills throughout the book to help somebody to do this. But what would you say for you would be the top 3 if you were to give a bit of a highlighted overview right now?
I think one of the most important starting points is always to begin with affinity. And affinity is a related concept to trust. How do you win people to you before you try and win them over to your idea?
Yeah.
And that's got to be the starting point for any conversation, any persuasion to occur. Trust is the foundation to build on.
Yep.
And so I think in that instance, what you want to do is make sure that you're doing things that allow the other person to feel seen, known, heard, valued. And so there's lots of different tips and techniques around how to do this. One of the things that's interesting to look at is the research around oxytocin release. So oxytocin is the body's social bonding hormone. And so it is released, and it's so unconscious we don't even know it's happening until you experience it. Like, you have a conversation with someone, you walk away and go, I really feel like I clicked with them. I don't know why, I just did.
Yeah. That's
oxytocin. This is unconscious release of a hormone that basically tells you that person is trustworthy.
Yep.
And sometimes you have the conversation, you walk away from it, and individually, like, they said all the right things, but I just didn't click at all. That's a lack of oxytocin that's released.
Interesting.
So what I look at in the book in detail is why. Like, what are the conditions under which our bodies release that hormone? Because that's actually a really important thing, that if we're going to build trust, you need to create the environment where people feel they warm to you. So there's some great research around what actually does or doesn't work in doing this. One of the key things is synchronicity. If you can get in sync with a person that you're trying to persuade, this can make all the difference, because unconsciously it signals likeness, sameness, which leads to trust and safety.
Yep.
And so there are ways to do that. And I've heard over the years the advice like, mirror their body language. If they cross their legs, you cross your legs.
Yeah.
If they scratch their ear, you scratch your ear. And I always just think it's a little bit contrived, a bit manipulative, actually, some of that stuff. And so I remember speaking, I had lunch actually late last year with a guy who'd done most of the formative research around oxytocin release, a guy named Paul Zak, who's written some brilliant books about this. And I was having lunch with him and I said, so like, I know you talk a lot about synchronicity. How do you do that in a non-awkward way?
Yeah.
Like, without
Good
like,
question.
the whole body language mirroring thing. Because there's lots of other ways you can do it too. They're interestingly are very effective, but not very replicatable. For instance, clapping, singing, dancing, moving. When you do things in sync, there's a mind meld that forms. This is why groups who clap together, you go to whether it's a church service or a football match, when people are doing things in unison, there's a herd mentality, there's a mind meld that forms. We know, we like, we trust each other. That's where tribalism kicks in. So tricky thing is, if you're having a conversation with someone, and it might be someone in your downline team or even someone you're recruiting to your business, and there's that blockage there, it's hard to go, let's all just clap together, because that'll get us on the same page. So what you can do, and this is what Paul said, which I thought was so interesting, he said, one of the most effective things that's really simple is go for a walk. Why? Because going for a walk, if you walk side by side with someone, eventually you'll start to match their cadence. You'll get in step with them. When you get in step with someone, that same mind meld feature happens. We start to create a sense of connection and trust because you're doing something in sync. So that'd be a simple thing that'd be really effective at just creating an environment where people feel some of those signals of warmth and trust. The other thing that's really helpful is the herd mentality itself. So how do you use things like scarcity and social proof, the idea that other people like you are doing this, and which is why when you've got conferences, direct selling companies do this really well. It's effective to have people share their stories. Because if I'm sitting in the audience and I'm like, I'm still not sure about this company or this product or whatever, but I see someone like me who's sharing their experience, that creates massive social proof.
Yep.
That like someone like me can make this work and I can too. So I think social proof, herd mentalities, a little bit, and just a little bit, because again, it can become manipulative if you're not careful, a little bit of scarcity, a little bit of like everyone's doing this and you don't have to, like, but there's probably a window of time where you like the opportunity is at its peak type thing.
Yep.
So you want to do that again with integrity, but like scarcity is great because we take so many unconscious cues from the herd.
Yep.
If other people are doing something, we want to be part of it. So I think that's an important thing to play into. The third tip or key I'd probably suggest that when I read this, I loved this one. I've seen this play out personally a number of times. I've practiced this in really often very tense situations and it's worked an absolute treat, is a thing called the rate and reflect process. And so this is where if you're dealing with someone who's resistant or stubborn, you ask 2 questions. Specific questions in a specific order. So the first question you ask is, and you got to do this in a way that doesn't sound like you're techniquing them, okay? But like you say, like, from 1 to 10, I'm just curious, how open are you to, or how willing would you be to, and get them to rate from 1 to 10. And that if they're resistant or stubborn, they'll typically give you a 2 or a 3.
Yep.
It won't be a high number, but that's okay because the second question is this. That's cool. I'm just curious, how come you didn't give a lower number? And what's interesting in that moment, everything shifts because now the frame of reference isn't on all the reasons you don't want to do what I've suggested or all the reasons it's not a good idea. It's now on the small part of you that says there is benefit, there is value. So the clinical term for this technique, I call it the rate and reflect process. The clinical term is called motivational interviewing, and it's been used in the area of drug and alcohol abuse, trying to combat people who are really destructive life stage cycles. It's been the most proven and effective technique for 4 decades.
Wow.
It's incredibly well researched, really well founded. It works.
Yep.
And so I think that's a really great technique that's worth just having them in your back pocket.
Oh, that's a powerful one. I love that. That process of getting people to, you're literally switching their mind frame from focusing on the negative, which of course we're all geared towards. We've all got a negative bias, but flicking them over to the positive and getting them to focus for a moment on what they like about whatever the concept or the idea.
Correct.
Is. I like it. All right, I'm going to test that one out on Aiden tonight.
Give it a go. Let me know how you get on.
I will. I'll text you. I was like, Michael, it worked. He started putting money aside. He's not buying the Crocs. I actually just wanted to ask you a quick question about something that you wrote about in the book, which, of course, anyone who's ever done any training around selling or influencing in any way understands that people are driven to buy through emotion. And you talk about this and the fact that, it's what moves people. It's what gets them to take action is emotion. But you also bring in into the concept here that not all emotions are created equally.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask about this because this is a concept that was, brought to my attention a few years ago by somebody who I was doing a course with this person, and they indicated that whilst emotion is how you get people to move and therefore storytelling is very important, we all know this, the emotion you should play on the most is the emotion of fear because it's the one that drives people the hardest. And I want to ask you, is that, what's your opinion on that?
So there's a couple of emotions that are really effective, but they're only effective in the short term, and they tend to have, in the long term, a very destructive effect. Mm-hmm. And so the emotions that are very effective, they'll galvanize people's responses. Things like disgust and fear, anxiety, sometimes this sense of like bigotry, like it's us versus you. These are these emotions of like finding a common enemy.
Yep.
When you appeal to all of these emotions, they're very effective. Politicians use them constantly. Yeah. But over the long haul, they tend not to bring out the best in human beings. So what typically the research around emotions has found is different emotions have different reactions in our brain. So for instance, the emotions around fear and scarcity or fear and disgust have a narrowing effect. So they'll cause us to react in the moment, a very limbic approach response. It's like do something now only because, and I'm not going to think about it. There's no nuance involved. Just got to react now. It's fight and flight. And so if you want to get people to take a swift and decisive move in that moment, appealing to fear is great. But if you want to get them to, if you want to appeal to more, I guess, not the base level human emotions, if you want to appeal to things like loyalty, kindness, justice, service, emotions like hope and love are going to be far more effective.
Yeah.
And, generosity, these sort of things that fear will never lead to those. The fruit of fear, the fruit of scarcity, the fruit of disgust, you can persuade people really fast, but it doesn't ever lead to those longer term things that actually see human nature flourish. So that's probably the research, and there's a lot in that in terms of like which emotions work best, but we've got to be super careful that some emotions, while they're very effective, they're effective in the short term, and in the long term do a lot more damage.
And the really interesting thing about that is, of course, fear is not congruent with building trust. So, while we, and by the way, singing from the same hymn book here, I love that you led with trust first, because, more needed now than ever before, also harder to earn than it's ever been. And yet the driver, you made at the point of, it's not trust in the brand, it's not trust in the product, it's trust in you.
Correct.
But the thing is that when we, I kind of, the way I explain it when I'm doing any training is to talk about the car crash. And, you drive past a car crash. And if you think about your social media content in this way, if you drive past a car crash, you want to look, you want to see what's going on over there. And likewise, a social media post or social media content that's like a car crash, everyone looks at it. You're going to get attention for sure. There's no question there that people are going to pay attention to what you're doing. The problem is that people do business or buy from people that they trust. And it's kind of like that content on social media being that car crash. You're going to drive past it. You're going to look because you're curious. There's no way in hell you're getting out of your car and running into the middle of the car crash. You're going to keep driving past. And the social media content's a lot like that too. And that's where I think fear-driven content that is, and a lot of marketing right now is really focused on this, has been for the last few years, may get people to make a decision quickly, but it doesn't build any trust. And people typically do business with people they like, know, and trust long-term. And so, that whole short-term gain, long-term pain thing is a really big deal when it comes to evoking the wrong emotions. And I think being intentional about your emotion is such a powerful and important act in your marketing and your social media strategy.
Absolutely.
Would you agree with that?
100%. Yeah, for sure. And I think we've got to be careful of how you catch people is how you keep them.
Yeah.
So if you bring people in because of, and fill in the blank, any of the destructive things, like we're going to really lowball the price or have really poor quality, but we're going to have massive growth and huge margins.
Yeah.
How you catch them is how you keep them. So if that's what people are attracted to, that's what they will attracts like, and suddenly you've got a business of people that don't value quality and integrity and all the rest of it.
Yep.
And it's a bit like this. If you attract people with fear and scarcity, that's essentially what you need to keep creating. And keeping people afraid takes a lot of energy.
Yeah,
it
doesn't feel so good either.
Correct.
In the scheme of things. So, couple of quick questions I've got for you. I feel like I'm very aware of the time, and I want to keep talking with you because I'm fascinated by all of this, and I think it's such a powerful topic. But two things I want to touch on. The first is the influencer. In this industry, there is a lot of focus on the influencer and the importance of building influencers and creating influencers and micro and macro and big and small. And, I'm very challenged by this because, for a number of reasons. I don't want to influence your response. I actually want to know what your thoughts are around influencer marketing right now, and having such a heavy focus, I suppose, on that being a strategy in 2024, specifically to sell product and business opportunities.
I think the key thing now is that you need to be much more explicit. And some of this is going to be driven by legislation that if it's a sponsored post or you've been incentivized to say something, you need to be upfront. I think this goes back to that self-deprecation, self-disclosure thing. If, for instance, you're an influencer and you're pushing something and there's a benefit for you in that, just be really upfront about that. That's actually a much better way to go. And I say that it's not just in the online influence or retail or social commerce or direct selling world. This is like so many industries. For instance, mortgage brokers, financial planners. At the back end of their business model is often trailing commissions.
Yeah.
And you've got people, they'll sit down with a client and they don't explain that to the client. And what's in the back of that client's mind the whole time when they're sitting down with a mortgage broker or financial advisor is, what's in this for you?
Yeah.
How do you get paid? Now, they won't generally ask you, but like one of the best things you can do to build trust is up front just go, you know what? So you might be wondering, how does this whole industry work if you've never worked with a mortgage broker before? The way it works is you don't pay me, I get paid from the bank, but it's a commission based on this, this, and this. And if you change in the first 2 years your loan, after the clawbacks mean I have to pay that commission back to the bank. Like, just to be upfront about it, because all it does is it suddenly sets the other person's mind that it's like, okay, I know what I'm in for because I know how you're being paid. So I think from an online influencer perspective, when things seem really organic, like I'm just going to try out a lipstick because I'm just interested in it, for instance, but you don't say that you're actually being sponsored or that you're a rep for that company, eventually it comes out, it becomes evident, becomes clear.
Yeah.
And that's when trust is broken. So I think certainly one of the things with influencers is you've got to be far more overt now about what you're being paid for or what the arrangement behind the scenes is. I think that goes a long way to engendering trust. I think that's really important.
Yeah. And so the other issue, of course, we've got is that attention spans are so much smaller now than what they've ever been before. One of the funny statistics that I think I've even put into one of my promotional reels was the fact that a goldfish has more of an attention span than the average human right now on social media. And so the question I've got here is, how do we compel people in a social media environment with such short attention spans? And this might be a very big question, so I'm very okay if you want to.
It is a big question. What I would say is the thing that gets cut through most, and we sort of flagged this before, is just honesty, just being real. I mean, the woman with the trying to put the eyelashes on, that's the sort of thing that even when people are time starved and busy and distracted, that'll get their attention because it's so real.
Yeah.
It gets cut through.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the thing, is there's so much content out there that's so professional. And like I've been sort of playing around with this myself over the last 6 to 8 months around the release of the book, is that I've done all these video pieces. And there's short video pieces for TikTok and Instagram. This is all new to me. I'm a millennial. I'm not a Gen Z. So like TikTok is not my world. I have to like push myself to try and do new things.
Yeah.
That's what we all have to do. But I like trying to figure out what's the right vibe, because I mean, me on stage typically is no tie, but like suit jacket, button up shirt, pocket square. That's just my vibe. Has been for years. I feel comfortable. That's my personal brand in a way. But I'm like, that's not appropriate for these videos. So I'm like, what's the right vibe? And so anyone that's watched my video content over the last 6 or 7 months has probably noticed that I've taken some swings. I'm like in the backyard, tripod set up, but just in the backyard with the lawn and a hedge behind me, wearing a t-shirt, doing a video. Some of them are sort of in the lounge room with a button-up shirt on, but like I'm still trying to figure out how to strike the right tone, because what I do know is that the more unvarnished it is, the more engaging. That's tricky because my general vibe is pretty varnished. I'm not a shoot from the hip dude. Like I'm thoughtful, I'm pretty concise in what I say. So I've got to be very careful that can come across as seeming too polished. So for me, I'm trying to toy with, how do I still be true to me? Like, this is what I'm like.
Yeah.
But at the same time, dial it down, or at least make it really organic. So I think that's for all of us. That's a challenge. I've been tinkering with the same thing myself.
Yeah. So it's so true. And, I told the story a little while ago, actually on this podcast around when Facebook Live first came out. I went over to social media marketing world in San Diego to learn from some of the world's best around how to do Facebook Live right. If you're going to do it, how do you do it right? And this would have been a good 7-8 years ago, I reckon now. Yeah. And I thought I need to come back and I need to be able to share with everyone this, groundbreaking information around exactly how you do it, what's the go. And it didn't matter which speaker I went to, and I would have seen a good 10 speakers talking on this topic. Every one of them, their response was really, really simple. Just hit go live. just hit go live, because the result comes from showing up, not from perfection. And so when I got home, after I'd done exactly what you were just talking about, Michael, the sit down and the plan out, what am I going to say? And being quite polished in my lives, I decided, I just had this sort of epiphany as I'd been driving my car, and I thought, oh, that's a really great tip. I should definitely share that. And my normal behavior would have been, you write it down and get home. I'm going to plan this out, set the tripod up. Instead, I parked my car on the side of the road. I put my phone on the dashboard and I just spoke straight to the camera. It was organic. It was real. And what was really interesting was I actually had a professional videographer who specialized in this space reached out to me a week later, and he said, can I use your video as an example? I said, what are you talking about? Huh. And he said, well, I teach this stuff. And he said, your video in your car was the best video I've ever seen you do, because number one, accidentally you had brilliant lighting because you've got no lighting behind you, which is great, but you had lighting on both sides and in the front. But he said the interesting thing about it was I felt like you and I were just there in the car together and you were just talking to me because of the way that you'd staged it. And I said, I didn't stage it at all. And he said, it was brilliant. Don't ever stage a video again. So there you go.
Yep. That's so interesting.
So I look forward to a video from you, Michael, in your car.
All right, done. Sounds like a plan.
Awesome. Well, I've got 4 really quick questions for you because I know we've got to wrap up, and I know you're a very busy man and got lots of things to do. But just very quickly, obviously we want people to be grabbing this book, Mindstuck. Where can they get this from? And we'll put it in the show notes as well. Have you got a website? Yeah. What can they do?
Yeah, so website is mindstuck.net. So that'll be all the details are on there, links off to different platforms that it's on. Amazon is the main one that we've distributed through, but it's in all the bookstores as well. So depending on wherever you are in the world, it'll be in your local bookstore as well.
Brilliant.
So mindstuck.net would be the place to grab it.
Fantastic. And we, of course, my 4 questions, we need to know what's your favorite book for us to add to our accelerator book list. We already have added Mindstuck. And I think last time you and I spoke, you mentioned Think Again by Adam Grant.
Yes, yep. If people haven't read that, I still recommend that.
Have you got a new one for us to add to the list this time?
Yeah, I do. So a book that I'd recommend is called The Catalyst by Jonah Berger. It's a great book looking at some of the related themes to what's in Mindstuck, about what are the things that cause people to get stuck in their decision making, and then how do you essentially particularly the use of language to act as a catalyst for people to change. There's some great stuff in there.
Brilliant. All right. Well, I know Greg hates it when I speak with you because I go straight to Amazon and buy more books. So I'll be in trouble again today, but because I don't have that one, so I'm looking forward to checking it out. And if you could have a superpower, any superpower, what would it be and why?
Teleporting. I'd love to be able to just go from here to
that's so funny.
Somewhere in the US, or just be able to react quickly, respond quickly
fast,
to jet lag. I just think, oh gosh, that would be good.
Yeah, forget business class, just be there.
Just be there and then be back. Absolutely.
Yep. And your favorite quote, or the quote of the moment, I should say, because we've had your favorite quote multiple times.
I love a quote from Andy Stanley, who's a leadership expert and written some great books around some of the related themes in Mindstuck. And he had this great quote in one of his books. He said, when one party in any relationship wins, the relationship always loses. And I just thought that was so profound, this idea that if we're going into even any conversation or discussion or negotiation with the intent to just win, to beat the other party, even if we do win, if it comes at the cost of the relationship, you haven't actually won.
Yeah.
And I think that's such a good reminder for all of us.
Yep. That's such a good one, and very relevant to what we've talked about today too. So brilliantly tied in. And last but not least, if you could go back in time and say one thing to your past self, what would that be?
I actually was asked this question at an event recently, and the answer was, no one knows what they're doing. And I would say this to encourage, because I think there's this sense that when you're in your early 20s or your late teens, you look at things, everyone else seems to have it so much together.
Yeah.
They've all got it figured out. And the more I've gone on in life, and I find myself now many days working with really senior CEOs, leaders, people in the government, people in politics, people that from the outside look like they've got it all together. And when you actually get to know, they're just real people who they're just figuring it out as well.
Yeah.
No one has actually got it all sorted out.
No.
And we're all just figuring our way forward. And so I think that's an encouragement to anyone listening. So that's what I'd say to my younger self, is that just everyone's trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
And so give it a red hot go.
Yeah, I love it. So true and so relevant. Thank you again so much, Michael. It's been great chatting with you again. And of course, congratulations again on your 10th book, an amazing achievement. I really appreciate you taking the time out to come and chat with us on the podcast.
It's a pleasure. Lovely to spend some time.
Yeah, you too. And thanks again to our beautiful listeners. We'll see you on the podcast again next week. Bye for now, everybody. Thank you for joining us in this episode of the Direct Selling Accelerator Podcast. If you love listening and you found that this was helpful for your direct selling business, please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also check out the recommended video that's popped up on your screen right here. I look forward to seeing you again next time. Bye for now.